My name is Mark, 58 years old, and a widower for almost 20 years now. I sold my house to help my daughter and her husband buy their dream home, then moved in with them. It started well, but gradually I became their unpaid housekeeper. Yesterday, Sarah gave me an ultimatum: continue serving her husband without complaints or leave immediately. I smiled, walked to my room, and reached for my suitcase. Let me know where you are watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey of rediscovering self-respect after decades of sacrifice. I never imagined I would find myself in this situation. After my wife Elizabeth died from cancer, when our daughter Sarah was only 10 years old, I dedicated my entire life to being both mother and father to her. The early years were incredibly difficult. I remember countless nights sitting at our kitchen table, bills spread out before me, trying to figure out how to make ends meet on a single income. I worked 2 jobs for several years. During the day, I was a mechanical engineer at Davidson Technologies, and 3 evenings a week I worked as a computer repair technician. The schedule was grueling, but it allowed me to provide Sarah with a stable home and the opportunities I believed she deserved. I turned down several promotions that would have required travel or longer hours. My boss never understood why I would sacrifice career advancement, but Sarah was my priority. How could I explain that missing her school plays or parent-teacher conferences simply was not an option for me? There were opportunities to date again, to perhaps find another partner to share my life with. A few coworkers tried to set me up, and occasionally a parent from Sarah's school would express interest. I always politely declined. It was not that I did not want companionship, but finding the time and emotional energy seemed impossible. More importantly, I worried about how a new relationship might affect Sarah during her formative years. She had already lost her mother. I did not want her feeling like she had to compete for my attention or adapt to a new parental figure. Despite the challenges, we created beautiful memories together. When Sarah was 12, I took her camping in the mountains for the first time. I taught her how to set up a tent, build a fire, and identify different constellations in the night sky. We sat by the campfire roasting marshmallows, and she told me she felt close to her mother, there under the stars. It was one of those perfect moments that made all the sacrifices worthwhile. As Sarah entered her teenage years, I braced myself for rebellion, but it never really came. She was a good student, responsible and kind-hearted. We had our disagreements, of course, but we always worked through them with mutual respect. I remember teaching her to drive in an empty parking lot, both of us laughing at her initial tendency to brake too hard. When she was accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I could not have been prouder. The day I dropped her off at college was bittersweet, tears streaming down my face as I drove away, but I was comforted knowing I had raised a compassionate, intelligent young woman. Throughout college, Sarah remained the thoughtful daughter I had raised. She called regularly, came home for holidays, and always expressed gratitude for the sacrifices I had made. When she graduated with honors in business administration, I sat in the audience feeling like the luckiest father in the world. Elizabeth would have been so proud of the woman our daughter had become. Sarah secured a good job at a marketing firm in Chicago after graduation. We maintained our close relationship, speaking on the phone several times a week and meeting for dinner whenever our schedules allowed. She would tell me about her work challenges, seeking my advice and seeming to value my perspective. I felt confident that our bond was unbreakable. That all changed when she met Robert. The first time Sarah mentioned him, her voice had a different quality to it, a breathlessness I had not heard before. She described him as brilliant, ambitious, and from a wealthy family that owned several car dealerships across the Midwest. After a few months of dating, she brought him home to meet me. I still remember that day vividly, as it was the beginning of subtle but significant changes in our relationship. The afternoon Robert was scheduled to meet me for the first time, I spent hours preparing. I cleaned the house thoroughly, cooked my specialty pot roast, and even bought a nice bottle of wine despite rarely drinking myself. I wanted to make a good impression for Sarah's sake. She had spoken so highly of him, and I was genuinely happy she had found someone special. When they arrived, Sarah introduced us with obvious excitement. My first impression of Robert was not what I had hoped for. He was impeccably dressed in what I could tell was an expensive suit, but his handshake was limp and he barely made eye contact. As he glanced around my modest home, I caught a fleeting expression of distaste before his practiced smile returned. During dinner, Robert dominated the conversation, speaking at length about his family business, their vacation homes, and the luxury car he had recently purchased. When I asked questions about his interests or values, he gave cursory answers before steering the conversation back to his accomplishments or possessions. What troubled me most was how Sarah behaved around him. My confident, thoughtful daughter seemed transformed into someone who constantly sought his approval, laughing a bit too enthusiastically at his jokes and repeatedly referencing his achievements. At one point, when I mentioned a charity event I had volunteered for, Robert dismissively called it a waste of time that could be better spent networking with the right people. Instead of defending the values she had always shared with me, Sarah nodded in agreement. As the evening progressed, it became increasingly clear that Robert came from a background of privilege that had shaped his worldview significantly. He made several comments about people who did not know the right people or attend the right schools, seemingly unaware that I fell into those categories. When Sarah mentioned my career as an engineer, Robert responded with, "That is a solid middle-class profession," in a tone that made it sound like a consolation prize in life. In the months that followed, I noticed Sarah changing in subtle but concerning ways. Her wardrobe became more expensive, and she began dropping names of exclusive restaurants and clubs. She mentioned feeling embarrassed about her older car and was saving for something more impressive. These materialistic concerns had never been part of her character before. I tried to have a heart-to-heart conversation with her about these changes. One Sunday afternoon, when she visited alone, I gently expressed my concerns that she seemed to be adopting values that had never been important to her before. "Daddy, you just do not understand how things work in certain circles," she said, using a condescending tone she had never taken with me before. "Robert is introducing me to people who can really help advance my career. There is nothing wrong with wanting nice things and moving up in the world. There is absolutely nothing wrong with ambition or success, sweetheart," I replied carefully. "I just want to make sure you are making these choices for yourself, not to impress Robert or his family." Her face flushed with anger. "That is so unfair. You have always been content with just getting by, but I want more. Robert appreciates quality and success, and so do I. Just because you never aimed higher does not mean I have to limit myself." Her words stung deeply. She had never before implied that my life choices represented a failure of ambition rather than deliberate sacrifices made for her benefit. I decided not to push further, hoping this was just a phase she would grow out of once the relationship matured. Despite my misgivings, Robert and Sarah got engaged 6 months later. The wedding planning quickly became an exercise in extravagance. The venue was an exclusive country club where Robert family had memberships. Sarah's chosen dress cost more than 3 months of my salary. When I expressed concern about the mounting expenses, suggesting that starting married life with substantial savings might be more practical than a lavish one-day celebration. Both Sarah and Robert looked at me as if I had suggested they get married in a backyard with paper plates. "We have to invite Robert's business associates and family friends," Sarah explained impatiently. "This is an investment in our future." I contributed every penny I could to help with wedding expenses, even taking out a small loan to cover my portion. The wedding day itself was beautiful, but uncomfortable for me. Robert's family dominated the event, with his mother effectively taking over the role that my late wife should have filled. I was seated at a table far from the main party, along with a few distant relatives from Robert's side who seemed equally out of place. During his toast, Robert thanked his parents profusely, but mentioned me only in passing as Sarah father. Throughout the event, I could not shake the feeling that I was being treated as an obligation rather than an honored parent of the bride. Several of Robert's friends made comments that revealed Sarah had shared very little about her background or my role in raising her. One woman expressed surprise when I mentioned being a single father, saying, "Oh, I assumed Sarah was from a proper family. How nice that she overcame that." I smiled politely and excused myself, stepping outside to compose my emotions. As I stood alone in the garden of the country club, I reminded myself that this day was about Sarah's happiness, not my feelings. If this was the life she wanted, I needed to support her choice, even if it meant watching her become someone I barely recognized. About a year after the wedding, Sarah called me with excitement in her voice. She and Robert had found their dream home in an upscale neighborhood called Lakeside Estates. The property was beautiful, she explained, with 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that backed up to a small private lake. There was just one problem: they needed additional money for the down payment to secure the mortgage. "The market is so competitive right now, Dad," Sarah explained. "We need to put down at least 30% to have our offer considered seriously. We are about $60,000 short." I sat silently for a moment, considering what she was asking. My house was not large or luxurious, but it had been my home for over 30 years. It held every memory of my life with Elizabeth and raising Sarah. The tree in the backyard still had the faded remnants of a treehouse I had built when Sarah was 8. The height markings tracking her growth remained penciled on the kitchen doorframe. "Are you asking me to loan you the money?" I finally asked. "Well, we were thinking, since you are living alone in that big house, maybe it would make sense for you to sell it. You could help us with the down payment, and we could put the rest in savings for your retirement. You are getting close to that age after all." Her comment about my age stung a bit. I was only 56, hardly ready for a retirement home. But I tried to consider her proposal objectively. My neighborhood had appreciated significantly in value over the decades. If I sold, I could help Sarah and still have enough to rent a nice apartment. My longtime neighbor and friend Linda strongly advised against it when I mentioned the idea over coffee on my porch. "Mark that house as your security," she warned. "Do not give up your independence. Once you sell, you cannot just get another house in this market if things do not work out." My friend Frank, who had been my college roommate and was now a semi-retired lawyer, was even more blunt. "They are adults with good jobs. Let them save up like everyone else. That house is your nest egg." Despite these warnings, I kept thinking about all the times I had promised Elizabeth I would always take care of Sarah. After several sleepless nights, I made my decision. I called a realtor and put my house on the market. The selling process was emotionally wrenching. Each room needed to be cleared of personal items for showings, meaning I had to pack away family photos and mementos that had surrounded me for decades. The house sold surprisingly quickly, for more than the asking price to a young couple expecting their first child. As I watched them walk through what had been my home, the husband with his arm protectively around his pregnant wife, I felt a bittersweet sense of things coming full circle. The day I handed over the keys was one of the hardest of my life since Elizabeth's passing. I stood in the empty living room, remembering Sarah taking her first steps across the worn carpet. Elizabeth sitting by the window reading during her chemotherapy treatments, and countless Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter, where I had prepared thousands of meals and helped Sarah with her homework. Every inch of the house contained pieces of my history. With the sale complete, I had a substantial sum of money. I gave Sarah and Robert the $60,000 they needed for their down payment, with the understanding that I would keep the rest for my future needs. As I was researching apartments to rent, Sarah made an unexpected suggestion. "Dad, we have been talking, and it seems silly for you to waste money on rent when we will have all this extra space. Why do not you move in with us? We have that fifth bedroom on the lower level that would be perfect. You can save your money, and we would love having you around. Plus, you could help out with the house while Robert and I are working." The offer caught me off guard. Living with my daughter and son-in-law had not been part of my plan. I valued my privacy and independence, and I was not sure how comfortable I would be in their home, especially given what I had observed of Robert over the past couple of years. However, the idea of being close to Sarah again was appealing. And if they started a family, I could be there to help with my grandchildren. "That is very generous, sweetheart. Are you sure Robert is comfortable with this arrangement?" "It was his idea," she assured me, though something in her expression made me wonder if that was entirely true. "He said it makes financial sense for everyone." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I put most of the proceeds from my house sale into secure investments, kept some in an accessible account for living expenses, and packed my belongings to move into Sarah and Robert's newly purchased home. The first few weeks actually went relatively well. My bedroom was smaller than I was used to, and located in the basement level with a small window, but it had an attached bathroom and was comfortably furnished. I helped unpack and set up the new house using my handyman skills to hang pictures and assemble furniture. I cooked dinner most evenings, enjoying preparing meals for a family again, after years of cooking for one. Sarah seemed appreciative, and even Robert made comments about how useful it was having me around. In those early days, I felt hopeful about our arrangement. Maybe this was a chance to rebuild the close relationship Sarah and I once had. Maybe Robert would come to see me as family rather than an outsider. Maybe this new chapter would be full of warmth and connection, the extended family I had missed since Elizabeth's death. I could not have been more wrong. The change happened so gradually that I barely noticed it at first. Small comments here and there, subtle shifts in tone, slight changes in expectations. By the time I fully understood what was happening, the transformation was nearly complete. I had gone from beloved father to unpaid household staff. It began with casual requests. "Dad, since you are home all day, would you mind running the vacuum? Or, could you start dinner before we get home?" These seemed reasonable, given that I was living in their house rent-free. I was happy to contribute and keep busy during my days. I took pride in keeping the house tidy and preparing tasty meals, but over time the requests became expectations and then demands. The list of my responsibilities grew exponentially. I was now doing all the cooking, cleaning, laundry, yard work, and home maintenance. If I missed anything or did not complete tasks to their standards, I would hear about it immediately. One evening, about 4 months after moving in, I had prepared a pot roast dinner, similar to the one I made when first meeting Robert. As we sat at the table, Robert took a bite and frowned. "This meat is tough," he said, pushing his plate away slightly. "Did you use a different recipe?" "No, same recipe as always," I replied, though the cut of meat might have been different. The store was out of my usual choice. Robert sighed dramatically. "When you are responsible for meals, you should plan ahead better. Maybe check multiple stores next time." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Dad, you know Robert prefers his meat tender. Maybe you could try harder next time." I felt a flush of embarrassment, and something else I could not immediately identify. It took me several hours of reflection that night to recognize it was indignation. I had prepared hundreds of meals for them without complaint, and rather than appreciation, I was receiving criticism over a slightly tougher cut of meat. The incidents multiplied. Robert began leaving lists of tasks for me to complete each day, as if I were an employee rather than a family member. Sarah started inspecting the house when she returned from work, pointing out areas that needed attention. They discussed me in the third person, even when I was present in the room. "He forgot to water the plants again," Sarah would say to Robert, despite my standing just a few feet away. "Well, remind him that those ferns were expensive," Robert would reply, as if I were a child or servant who needed correction. When they entertained friends, which happened frequently, I was expected to prepare elaborate meals but was no longer invited to join them at the table. The first time this happened, Sarah came to my room the morning before a dinner party. "Dad, we are having Robert's work colleagues over tonight. Could you prepare that salmon dish they liked last time, but we would appreciate it if you had your dinner in your room. Robert thinks it might make some of the guests uncomfortable having his father-in-law at the table." I was stunned into silence. Sarah must have interpreted my shock as agreement, because she patted my arm and added, "Thanks for understanding. Maybe leave the dessert plated in the refrigerator before you head downstairs." That night, I ate alone in my room while listening to the laughter and conversation above me. I felt a deep sense of humiliation that my own daughter thought I was not presentable enough to sit at a table with her husband colleagues. After that, it became the norm. I was the invisible chef and housekeeper, expected to be neither seen nor heard when they had company. Robert began openly criticizing me in front of his friends when they did see me. "My father-in-law is from a different generation," he would say with a condescending smile. "He does not quite understand how things work in our world, but he makes himself useful around the house." Even more painful was that Sarah no longer defended me. In fact, she often joined in with comments like, "Dad is old-fashioned, but he is learning our way of doing things." The daughter who once valued my wisdom and experience now treated me as an outdated relic who needed to be managed. The only bright spot in this increasingly difficult situation was my granddaughter Amy. Sarah and Robert had a daughter about a year after I moved in, and from the moment she was born, we formed a special bond. When Amy was old enough to toddle down to my room, she would often escape her nanny supervision to visit me. I would read her stories, teach her little songs, and sometimes sneak her cookies I had baked. Amy, now 5, was the one person in the house who seemed genuinely happy to see me. "Grandpa," she would whisper conspiratorially, "can we make cookies today? I will be your special helper." Those moments in the kitchen with flour dusting her little nose and her giggles filling the room were what kept me going during the darkest times. I taught Amy to make the same chocolate chip cookies that I used to make with Sarah using her grandmother Elizabeth's old recipe. On several occasions, Robert or Sarah would walk in on these baking sessions and frown with disapproval. "Amy, you are getting your clothes dirty," Sarah would scold. "And Dad, please do not fill her up with sweets before dinner." Robert was even more direct. "We are trying to teach Amy about quality and refinement. Homemade cookies are quaint, but perhaps you could stick to the organic gluten-free treats we buy for her." Amy would look crushed when our baking sessions were interrupted, and I would feel that familiar mix of embarrassment and indignation rising again. But for Amy's sake, I would simply nod and promise to be more careful next time. As the months passed, my role in the household became increasingly servile. I was expected to be up early to prepare breakfast and pack lunches, spend the day cleaning and running errands, prepare dinner, clean up afterward, and then make myself scarce for the evening. If I sat in the living room to watch television, Robert would inevitably comment that he and Sarah needed the space for themselves. I found myself retreating to my basement room earlier and earlier each night. My social connections dwindled as well. At first I had maintained regular coffee meetings with my old friends and neighbors, but Robert and Sarah increasingly required my presence at home for one task or another. When I did manage to meet a friend, I would return to passive-aggressive comments about tasks left undone or errands that could have been run. Eventually, I began declining social invitations rather than deal with the aftermath. One particularly painful memory stands out. I had planned to attend my former colleague retirement party, an event I had been looking forward to for weeks. The morning of the party, Robert informed me that the dishwasher was making a strange noise, and I needed to wait for the repair person who was coming sometime between 9 and 3. "But I have plans today," I explained. "I told you about this party weeks ago." Robert looked genuinely confused. What could possibly be more important than making sure our kitchen is functional? "We have guests coming this weekend." When I tried to stand my ground, Sarah intervened. "Dad, we let you live here rent-free. The least you can do is help maintain the house. Your friends will understand." I missed the retirement party sitting alone in the house waiting for a repair person who finally showed up at 4:30, well after the time I could have made it to even part of the celebration. That night, neither Sarah nor Robert asked how the repair went or thanked me for waiting all day. It was simply expected. It was becoming painfully clear that in their eyes I was not a beloved family member they had generously welcomed into their home. I was unpaid labor, a convenient solution to their household management needs, and increasingly a burden they barely tolerated. The event that finally pushed me to my breaking point came after nearly 2 years of living with Sarah and Robert. They were hosting what Robert called a pivotal dinner party for his boss and several senior colleagues from his investment firm. For days leading up to the event, the house had been in a state of controlled chaos. I was given an extensive list of preparations, deep cleaning every room, preparing a gourmet 5-course meal, arranging fresh flower displays, polishing the silver that was only used for special occasions. The day of the dinner party, I was up at 5 in the morning to begin preparations. By afternoon, my back ached from hours of cooking and cleaning, but everything was on schedule. The house looked immaculate. The food was prepared and ready to be served at the appropriate times, and even Robert had grudgingly acknowledged that things appeared to be in order. As I was arranging the appetizer trays, Sarah came into the kitchen, wearing an elegant black dress I had never seen before. "Dad, Robert and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you stayed in your room during the party tonight." This was not unusual by now, but what followed was, "Actually, we would prefer if you did not come upstairs at all once the guests arrive. Not even to the kitchen. Everything should be prepared in advance so there is no need for you to be seen." I paused, a slice of cucumber in hand. "You want me to hide in the basement for the entire evening? What if something needs attention in the kitchen?" "We have hired servers for the evening," she explained, not meeting my eyes. "They will handle everything once guests arrive. Robert feels it would be awkward to explain your presence to his colleagues." The cucumber slice fell from my fingers. "Awkward, I am your father. What is awkward about that?" Sarah sighed with the impatient tone she increasingly used with me. "Dad, these are very important people. Robert's career could advance significantly based on tonight. His boss comes from a family with significant social standing. The story of my father living in the basement and working as our housekeeper does not exactly fit the image Robert needs to project." I felt as if I had been slapped. "Is that how you see me, as the housekeeper?" "Of course not," she said quickly, though her expression suggested otherwise. "You are family. But tonight is about impressions and Robert's career. Just this once, please stay downstairs and out of sight. We will bring you a plate later." Feeling numb, I nodded and finished my kitchen preparations in silence. As the hour of the party approached, I retreated to my basement room as instructed, feeling a deep sense of shame washing over me. I sat on my bed, listening to the sounds of arriving cars, greetings, and laughter filtering down from above. About an hour into the party, I realized I had forgotten to put out the special imported cheeses that Robert had specifically requested for the second course. Without thinking, I quietly made my way upstairs to quickly place them in the kitchen for the servers. As I reached the top of the stairs, I paused, hearing Robert's voice from the adjacent dining room. "The secret to our smooth-running household, excellent staff management," he was saying to what sounded like a captive audience. "Of course, we do not actually pay for full-time help. Sarah's father lives with us. Widower had nowhere else to go, so we took him in. He is a bit of a burden, honestly, getting up there in age, but we make it work." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. Then came Sarah's voice, clear as day. "At least he makes himself useful around the house. It is a fair exchange for giving him a place to live at this stage of his life." A female voice I did not recognize chimed in. "That is so charitable of you both. Not many young couples would take on that kind of responsibility." I stood rooted to the spot, the imported cheeses forgotten in my hands, as the conversation continued, with Robert accepting praise for his generosity and Sarah adding details about the challenges of having an aging parent in the home. Not once did either of them mention that I had sold my house to help them buy this very home we were standing in. Not once did they acknowledge that I spent my days cooking, cleaning, and maintaining their property without compensation or appreciation. As I was about to retreat back downstairs, crushed by what I had heard, Amy's voice piped up from the dining room. "My grandpa made all the food tonight. He makes the best food ever, much yummier than the restaurants, and he tells the best stories too." There was an awkward silence, then Robert's stern voice. "Amy, adults are talking now, and the caterers prepared dinner tonight, remember. Why do not you go find Sophia and play upstairs?" "But Daddy, I helped Grandpa make the dessert. We made it together and—" "Amy, that is enough. Go upstairs now." I heard the scrape of a chair and small footsteps running past the kitchen doorway. Amy's face was flushed with confusion and embarrassment as she dashed toward the stairs, not noticing me standing in the shadows. In the dining room, I heard Robert smoothly explaining, "Kids and their imagination. We have a wonderful catering service we use regularly. Now about that merger your firm is considering." I quietly returned to my room, setting the forgotten cheeses on my nightstand. For hours, I sat in the dark, replaying what I had heard over and over. My own daughter had referred to me as useful, like a household appliance. My son-in-law considered me a burden they generously tolerated. And they had deliberately erased my contributions, too embarrassed to admit to their wealthy friends that their impressive lifestyle was supported by an aging father they treated as a servant. Something broke inside me that night. A lifetime of putting Sarah first, of sacrificing my needs and wants for her benefit. And this was how she viewed me now, a useful burden, an embarrassment to be hidden away. I barely slept, and when morning came, I knew I could not continue living this way, not for one more day. The next morning, the house was quiet. Sarah and Robert had left early for work, and Amy was at school. I spent the day in a kind of trance, mechanically cleaning up the aftermath of the party, while my mind raced with thoughts and plans. By afternoon, I had reached a decision, though I had no idea how Sarah and Robert would react to it. Part of me wondered if they would even care. When they returned home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, sitting in one of the formal chairs I was rarely allowed to use. Sarah looked surprised to find me there instead of in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Dad, is everything okay? Dinner is not started yet. We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "About last night and about my place in this household." Robert entered the room, loosening his tie. "What is this about?" "We have had a long day, and I was looking forward to dinner." "I overheard your conversation with your guests last night," I said, looking directly at Robert and then at Sarah. "I heard how you described me. A burden. Someone you charitably took in who makes himself useful." Sarah had the grace to look embarrassed. but Robert simply shrugged. You were not supposed to be upstairs. And honestly, what did you expect us to say, that my father-in-law is our live-in maid? How would that look to people in my position? His casual cruelty left me momentarily speechless. Sarah quickly tried to smooth things over. Dad, you know we appreciate everything you do around here. Robert did not mean you are actually a burden. It is just complicated to explain our living arrangement to people who would not understand. People who would not understand what exactly, I asked. That the down payment for this house came from the sale of my home. That I spend my days cooking your meals, cleaning your house, and maintaining your property without payment or gratitude. Or that you are ashamed of having a middle-class father who worked as an engineer instead of inheriting wealth like Robert's family. Now hold on, Robert said, his tone hardening. Let us get something straight here. We gave you a place to live when you had nowhere else to go. We feed you, put a roof over your head. The money from your house sale was a fair exchange considering what housing costs these days. If anything, we gave you a generous deal. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I had experienced before. A generous deal. I gave you $60,000 for the down payment on this house. Money from selling the home where I raised your wife, the home that held every memory of our family. I cook, I clean, I do laundry. I maintain the house and garden. I have essentially been your full-time, unpaid housekeeper for 2 years now. You are being dramatic, Sarah said dismissively. We are family. Family helps each other. You needed a place to live and we needed help around the house. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. Is it mutually beneficial for me to be hidden away when you have guests, to be spoken about as a charity case, to have my granddaughter reprimanded for acknowledging that I cooked the meal everyone was enjoying? Robert stepped closer, his patience clearly wearing thin. Look, Mark, you need to understand your place in this household. We make the rules here. This is our home, not yours. You are here by our grace and favor. If you cannot accept that and be grateful for what we provide, perhaps this arrangement is not working out. My place, I repeated the word, stinging. And what exactly is my place, Robert? To be helpful without being difficult, he snapped. To recognize that at your age, with your limited resources, you should be grateful we have given you this opportunity instead of leaving you to fend for yourself. Sarah put a hand on Robert's arm, but her next words made it clear she agreed with him. Dad, I think what Robert is trying to say is that we all have roles here. Yours is to support our family by taking care of the home front while we build our careers. Is that really so awful? Many people your age are alone in tiny apartments with nothing to do all day. I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and barely recognized the person standing before me. Where was the compassionate, grateful young woman I had raised? When had she become this status-obsessed person who viewed her own father as a convenient source of free labor? I have a question for both of you, I said quietly. The money from my house sale beyond your down payment. The money that was supposed to be for my future needs. What happened to it? Their exchanged glance told me everything before they even spoke. We had some investments that needed attention, Robert said vaguely, and some expenses related to property taxes and homeowners association fees that were higher than expected. We were going to pay it back, Sarah added quickly. But there was the trip to Aspen, and then Robert's car needed an upgrade for his new position. So you spent my retirement money, I stated flatly, without asking, on ski trips and luxury cars. It is all in the family, Robert said dismissively. Your money, our money, what is the difference at this point? You live here, we take care of you. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my 58 years, but also a growing sense of resolve. I think we need to clarify the arrangement moving forward, I said. Either I am family treated with respect and given a voice in this household, or I am staff. And if I am staff, I should be paid a fair wage for my services, have defined working hours, and my own private living space that is not off limits to visitors. Robert laughed, an ugly sound, devoid of humor. You are seriously trying to negotiate based on what leverage exactly? Let me make this very simple for you, Mark. You have two choices here. You can accept your place in this household, continue to make yourself useful without complaints, and be grateful for what we provide. Or you can leave. Robert, Sarah exclaimed, though whether she was shocked by his ultimatum or my suggestion of being paid, I could not tell. Robert ignored her. No, it is time we got this straight. Your father has been increasingly difficult lately. The complaints, the sulking, the half-completed tasks. I am tired of it. So what will it be, Mark? Accept your role here gratefully or find somewhere else to go. I need an answer now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. When Sarah looked between us, clearly torn, but when she spoke, I knew where her loyalty lay. Dad, Robert is just being direct. We love having you here, but we need you to understand how things work in our home. Can you accept that and move forward without all this confrontation? I stood there in the living room of the house my money had helped buy, looking at my daughter and the man she had chosen, and felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of clarity. For 2 years, I had been holding on to the hope that my sweet, thoughtful Sarah was still in there somewhere, that she would eventually see how I was being treated and stand up for me. That moment was never going to come. Without a word, I turned and walked toward my basement room. I could hear Sarah calling after me, asking where I was going, but I did not answer. As I descended the stairs, I felt lighter with each step, as if I were shedding a heavy burden I had carried for years. When I reached my room, I pulled my old suitcase from the closet and began carefully selecting what to take with me. I packed essential clothing, my personal documents, and a few treasured mementos, the watch Elizabeth had given me on our wedding day, our small photo album, and a ceramic handprint Amy had made for me at preschool. Everything else could be replaced. As I packed, I wrote a short note to Amy explaining that I loved her very much and would see her again soon, but that Grandpa needed to live in his own place now. I slipped it under her pillow, knowing she would find it before her parents did. I heard Sarah coming down the stairs, her voice tense with irritation. Dad, what are you doing? We were not finished talking. I closed my suitcase and turned to face her. I am finished, Sarah. I have made my choice. She stared at the packed suitcase with genuine shock. You cannot be serious. Where would you even go? You do not have a job or savings or... I have more resources than you might think, I said calmly. I never told you about the separate account I maintained after selling the house. I always suspected I might need a backup plan. This was partly true. While Robert and Sarah had accessed most of my house sale proceeds, I had kept a small emergency fund in a separate account they did not know about. It was not much, but it would be enough to rent a modest apartment and sustain me until I could find part-time work. This is ridiculous, Sarah sputtered. You are overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Robert was just stressed about the dinner party. We do appreciate you, Dad. Do you? I asked quietly. When was the last time you said thank you for a meal I prepared? When was the last time you asked about my day or my feelings? When was the last time you defended me when Robert spoke down to me? Sarah fell silent, unable to recall a recent example of any of these things. I raised you to be kind and grateful, Sarah. I raised you to respect others regardless of their status or wealth. Somewhere along the way, you lost those values. I cannot stay here and watch the daughter I love treat me like a servant she is ashamed to acknowledge. "We are not ashamed of you," she protested, but her eyes slid away from mine. "It is just complicated with Robert's work and our social circle." "It is actually very simple," I replied. "Either you respect me as your father and treat me accordingly, or you do not. Your actions and Robert's have made it clear where I stand in this household." I picked up my suitcase and moved toward the stairs. Sarah blocked my path, panic replacing her irritation. "You cannot just leave. What about dinner? What about the house? Who will take care of everything?" The fact that her first concerns were about household management rather than my well-being only confirmed I was making the right choice. "You and Robert are adults with good jobs," I said, echoing the advice my friend Frank had given me years ago. "Figure it out like everyone else does." I moved past her up the stairs, suitcase in hand. Robert was waiting in the living room, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. "So, you are actually leaving, running away, because you got your feelings hurt?" he scoffed. "Where exactly do you think you are going to go?" "That is no longer your concern," I replied. "But I will be in touch through my attorney about recovering the funds that were meant for my retirement. I expect you will find it cheaper to repay me than to pay for legal proceedings." Robert's face flushed red. "Is that a threat after everything we have done for you?" "It is a statement of fact," I said, surprised at how steady my voice remained. "I sold my home to help you buy this house. You then spent money that was explicitly set aside for my future needs without my permission. I will be reclaiming those funds." I walked toward the front door, feeling their stunned gazes on my back. As I reached for the doorknob, Sarah finally found her voice again. "Dad, please, do not do this. We can talk about it more tomorrow when everyone is calmer." I turned to look at my daughter one last time before leaving. "I love you, Sarah. I always will. But I also need to love and respect myself. When you are ready to treat me like your father again, instead of your servant, you know how to reach me." With that, I walked out the door into the cool evening air. As I made my way down the driveway, suitcase in hand, I expected to feel fear or doubt. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and clarity. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first, and it felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I had made arrangements earlier that day, calling my old friend Frank from the basement while Sarah and Robert were at work. He was waiting around the corner in his car to drive me to a small extended stay hotel where I could gather my thoughts and plan my next steps. "You actually did it," Frank said with a mix of surprise and respect as I got into his car. "I was not sure you would follow through." "Neither was I admitted. But when the moment came, I realized I could not spend another day living that way." "Good for you, Mark. It is about time you stood up for yourself. Elizabeth would be proud." As we drove away from the mansion that had been my gilded cage for 2 years, I did not look back. Instead, I looked forward to whatever came next, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with my dignity intact. The weeks following my departure from Sarah and Robert House were both challenging and liberating. I stayed at the extended stay hotel for 10 days, using that time to search for an affordable apartment and reach out to old friends and colleagues. My emergency fund, while modest, gave me a small cushion to get established. Frank, true to his word, helped me navigate the legal aspects of reclaiming the money that had been meant for my retirement. As a semi-retired lawyer, he took my case pro bono, sending a formal letter to Sarah and Robert outlining the financial agreement that had been breached and the funds that were owed to me. Their initial response was dismissive, but when Frank mentioned potential legal proceedings that would become public record, their attitude changed quickly. They agreed to repay the money in installments over the next year. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in a pleasant older complex about 20 minutes from my former neighborhood. It was nothing fancy, but it had large windows that filled the rooms with natural light, a small balcony where I could grow herbs in pots, and most importantly, it was mine. I furnished it simply with second-hand pieces that reminded me of my old home, creating a space that felt warm and welcoming rather than like the museum showcase Sarah and Robert's house had been. The first few weeks on my own were an adjustment. After 2 years of constant work, caring for others, I found myself with empty hours to fill and only myself to please. Initially, I felt disoriented, automatically waking early to start breakfast, before remembering no one was waiting for me to serve them. I would catch myself planning elaborate dinners before realizing I only needed to cook for one. It was both freeing and somewhat melancholy. Sarah called repeatedly during those first weeks. I let most calls go to voicemail, needing time to process my feelings and establish my new boundaries. Her messages evolved from angry accusations about my ungrateful departure, to tearful pleas to return, and finally to grudging acknowledgments that perhaps some aspects of our living arrangement had been unfair. I listened, but was not ready to engage directly yet. The one exception I made was for Amy. When Sarah called to say Amy was distraught about my sudden absence and begged to speak with me, I immediately agreed. Hearing my granddaughter's voice filled with confusion and sadness broke my heart. "Grandpa, why did you go away? Do not you love us anymore?" "I love you more than anything in the world, sweetheart," I assured her. "Grandpa just needed to have his own home again, like you have your own room. But we will still see each other, I promise." After several conversations with Sarah, we arranged for me to see Amy every Saturday. I would pick her up and we would spend the day together at parks, museums, or sometimes just at my apartment, baking cookies and reading stories. Those Saturdays quickly became the highlight of my week, and I treasured watching Amy flourish in an environment where she received my undivided attention and unconditional love. About a month after leaving, I reconnected with my old photography hobby, something I had abandoned when Elizabeth got sick and never found time to resume. I dug out my old camera equipment, invested in a few digital upgrades, and began exploring my new neighborhood through a camera lens. The creative outlet brought me unexpected joy, awakening parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. I joined a local community center that offered activities for seniors initially, just to meet people, but soon becoming involved in their photography club. There I met Janet, a widow in her early 60s, who had faced a similar situation with her son and daughter-in-law. Our shared experiences created an immediate bond, and our friendship quickly became an important part of my new life. Janet was refreshingly direct, warmly compassionate, and had a wonderfully dry sense of humor that often left me laughing until my sides hurt. She had rebuilt her life after leaving her son's home 3 years earlier, and offered both practical advice and emotional support as I navigated my own journey. "The hardest part is accepting that the children we raised with such love and care can change so completely," she told me during one of our coffee meetings. "But the second hardest part is learning to put yourself first after a lifetime of putting others before you." With Janet's encouragement, I applied for a part-time position at a local hardware store. The work was straightforward, using my handyman knowledge to help customers find the right tools and materials for their projects. The modest income supplemented my savings and the repayment installments from Sarah and Robert, allowing me to live comfortably within my means. 3 months after my departure, Sarah finally requested a face-to-face meeting. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. The conversation was initially strained, with Sarah shifting between defensiveness and grudging acknowledgement of how I had been treated. "I never meant for things to go that far," she admitted after we had exhausted the small talk. "It just happened so gradually. Robert has certain expectations about how our household should run, and I got caught up in it all." "You are an adult with your own mind and values, Sarah. I responded gently but firmly. You allowed and participated in treating me like a servant rather than your father. That was your choice, not just Robert. Tears welled in her eyes. I know, and I am ashamed. When you left, everything fell apart. The house is a mess. We are spending a fortune on takeout and cleaning services, and Amy keeps asking why we were mean to Grandpa. It made me realize how much we took advantage of you. It was never about the work itself, I explained. I was happy to help around the house. What hurt was being treated with disrespect, being hidden away like someone to be ashamed of, and hearing you call me a burden when I had given up everything to help you. Our conversation lasted for hours, painful at times, but necessary. I did not agree to move back, but I did agree to rebuild our relationship slowly, with clear boundaries. We would meet in public places or at my apartment, never at her house where the power dynamic had been so unhealthy. I made it clear that while I would always be her father, our relationship moving forward would depend on mutual respect. As the months passed, I continued to develop my new life. Janet and I grew closer, our friendship evolving into something deeper. We took a photography course together, planned weekend day trips to capture images of the changing seasons, and spent comfortable evenings discussing books and sharing meals. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, I found myself thinking about the possibility of sharing my life with someone again. 6 months after leaving Sarah and Robert's home, Janet and I decided to combine our talents and resources to open a small photography studio. Janet had been a professional photographer in her younger years and still had connections in the community. We specialized in family portraits and particularly enjoyed working with families of multiple generations, capturing the special bonds between grandparents and grandchildren. On our studio opening day, I was surprised and touched when Sarah, Robert, and Amy arrived with flowers. Robert remained somewhat stiff and formal, but Sarah made a genuine effort to support this new chapter in my life. Amy, of course, was ecstatic to see her grandfather in his element, proudly showing her around the studio and letting her press the button on the camera for a few test shots. As they were leaving, Sarah hugged me tightly and whispered, "I am proud of you, Dad. I am sorry it took losing you for me to realize how special you are." That moment of genuine connection gave me hope that while our relationship would never be what it once was, we could build something new based on mutual respect rather than obligation and exploitation. Today, nearly a year since I walked out with my suitcase, my life has transformed completely. The photography studio has become modestly successful, focusing on preserving family legacies through thoughtful portraiture. Janet and I have moved from business partners to life partners, sharing a slightly larger apartment, with room for both our hobbies and frequent visits from our grandchildren. Amy stays overnight every other weekend, filling our home with her laughter and energy. My relationship with Sarah continues to heal slowly. We meet weekly for lunch, just the two of us rebuilding our connection, one conversation at a time. Robert and I maintain a cordial but distant relationship, which suits us both. Most importantly, I have reclaimed my dignity and rebuilt my life on my own terms. The ultimatum that was meant to keep me in my place ended up setting me free. When Sarah gave me those two impossible choices, she never imagined I would find a third path, one that led to self-respect and a new beginning. By walking away with my suitcase that day, I taught my daughter the most important lesson of all: true love and respect cannot be demanded or coerced, only freely given between equals. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have had the courage to walk away and start over at 58? Let me know in the comments. If this story touched you, please subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it is never too late to choose dignity and self-respect. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most difficult choices lead to the most beautiful beginnings.